Before I announce the presence of a quorum, because of the distances involved, I'm going to ask the tellers to head up to be sworn, please. And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I will declare the presence of a quorum for the annual town meeting of June 22nd, 2020. I will now read on behalf of the town clerk the constable's return of service. Pursuant to the written warrant, I have notified and warned the inhabitants of the town of Chatham by posting attested copies of the same in each of the post offices of said town at least 14 days before June 22, 2020, on June 4, 2020, signed John Proudfoot, Constable. Now swear the tellers, do you solemnly swear that you will faithfully and impartially perform all duties imposed upon you by your appointment as tellers according to the bylaws of Chatham and the laws of the Commonwealth? I do. Thank you. We are obviously meeting under extraordinary circumstances, and I want to thank all of you for coming out this evening to a location and venue made possible by an equally extraordinary job done by an array of town departments and officials under the direction of our town manager, the cooperation of our police and fire departments, the DPW, the park, natural resources, health, Channel 18, and especially Terry Whalen, among others. That has made it possible for us to meet with maximum feasible safety and precautions taken to allow us to carry out our job this evening, which is an important endeavor. Some things may be imperfect. There may be a reverberation, or my glasses may get steamed up from my mask, and I like to think that over the years I've done a pretty good job at recognizing those of you who wanted to speak. Not tonight, folks, so please don't take offense. We are extremely fortunate to have the assistance of a group of CERT volunteers, CERT being an acronym for Chatham Emergency Response Team, which operates under the auspices of the Brewster, Orleans, Chatham, Harwich Community Emergency Response Team. They are helping in many ways, guiding you to your seats, sanitizing microphones, and assisting us generally. As for novel announcements, all of the chairs have been sanitized. Except when you're speaking, please wear a mask, even though we have obviously recommended social distancing and are outdoors. There are restrooms available over there, and if you go over there, please observe the social distancing markings. Given the circumstances, we're dispensing with certain customary aspects and are balancing public health concerns, which we all share, with the need to carry out the town's business. As you know, a number of articles have been cut from the original warrant, others which have historically not been controversial and which enjoy unanimous support from the Board of Selectmen and your Finance Committee will be presented to you shortly as part of a consent calendar to minimize the time you spend here. Similarly, excuse me, as has been previously announced, the Board of Selectmen has voted to place all petitioned articles, consideration of the Council on Aging facility, and a few other items on a future special town meeting warrant, and I will shortly recognize the chair of the Board of Selectmen for motion on that. Before doing that, we will carry on one or two traditions. It being Chatham, obviously the fog is rolling in, and we welcome that. And one other tradition will be the Pledge of Allegiance, for which I will recognize our town manager, Jill Goldsmith, who will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. You have your choice. There's a flag behind me, and there's a rather small one over on Depot Road, if you prefer.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
with liberty
and justice for all.
Thank you. As is our practice, we acknowledge with gratitude the service of those town officials who have died since our last annual town meeting. Please join me in a moment of silence after I read the names of those town officers and employees who died during calendar 2019. But since we are deviating a bit from standard practice, I would ask that in that moment you also consider those who have and are continuing to suffer physically and economically from this pandemic, and also those first responders, healthcare workers, and so many others who have continued to serve us during these difficult times. Glenn Bryant, Walter Butler, Alice Clack, Richard Clifford, Patrick Connolly, Joe Craig, Catherine Dalton, Rosemary Den, Victor D. Christina, Eleanor Greenhalgh Kilty, Leroy Jarrett, Hillary LeClaire, Nat Mason, Bill Schweizer, George Snyder, Judy Young. Thank you. We have a non-voters section over in the bleachers outside of the fence and over in someplace over toward Nauset over there. And we obviously do not allow non-voters to participate in voice votes. If we have a counted vote, hold your card, which is obviously much larger than usual, so the tellers can see all of the card. Please identify yourselves when you speak, and by way of example, my name is Bill Litchfield. I'm elected as the moderator by you. I try to run the meeting with fairness. I'll now introduce the officials up front. Our town manager, Joel Goldsmith, the chair of our Board of Selectmen, Shireen Davis, and the chair of the Finance Committee, Stephen Daniel. In the combined interests of efficiency and safety, Ms. Daniel and Mr. Davis, Ms. Davis and Mr. Daniel will be the sole speakers on behalf of their boards this evening. Also here are their colleagues, Dean Nicastro, Jeff Dykens, Corey Metters. Our friend Peter Kokolis is recovering from hip replacement surgery, with which we wish him well and know that he's with us in spirit. And from the Finance Committee, Florence Selden, Norma Avalar, Tommy Doan, Barbara Madison, John Pappalardo, Joanne Sprague, John Whalen, and Andy Young are down front. And also Town Council, Mr. Costello, is right there, right in front of me. Please speak only after I've recognized you, given our venue. I'm going to ask that everyone, if you wish to speak, stand and raise your hand. Shouting Mr. Moderator isn't a good practice in the COVID era, and also I wouldn't necessarily be able to hear you. Once recognized, please come to one of the microphones. There are 3 in the aisles. There's one way over there. And we also have roaming microphones which can be brought to you. For obvious reasons, we're not going to have a line near any of the microphones. The microphones will be sanitized before and after every speaker. Please try not to touch the fixed microphones. By the same token, I've been asked by our electronic staff to please try to speak closely to the microphone because of wind. We're not obviously in the gymnasium. Every person here, of course, has always deserves courtesy and respect. I anticipate, maybe enacting a rule limiting speakers to 5 minutes. If that is adopted, I intend to be firm in enforcement. If you wish to offer an amendment, it should be in writing and handed to me after you make it so that the town clerk has it. Please see Mr. Costello, seated up here, who can help you with language. Motions may differ a little bit from that which are printed in the warrant. That which is read will prevail over the printed language. If there is a procedural issue about which you're unclear, please raise your hand, say point of order. Finally, when we conclude the meeting, please be patient in departing. We won't strictly dismiss you by rows, but it will be helpful if you continue to exercise prudence and social distancing, even if you just want to walk over to the Red Nun. Through the moderator, you may ask questions of any town officials on any matters being considered by the meeting. Selectmen, the Finance Committee, and other boards have expended great effort this evening, but it is your opportunity to ask questions, and you are to be commended for being here and for exercising your right to vote. So with that, I'll recognize Ms. Davis, the Chair of the Board of Selectmen, for a resolution on the rules, which are found on page 12 of the warrant.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move to resolve that this historic town meeting vote to adopt the rules of procedure for June 22nd, 2020 annual town meeting as written in the warrant, and let's knock this one out of the park.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. If there is no further discussion of the resolution, I'm going to deviate from past practice. I may forget and occasionally say all those in favor say aye, but let's try to discourage that. All those in favor, raise your card. Thank you. And those opposed? So voted unanimously. There may be an article in which I wish to step down, and in prior years, Dave Nixon has served as deputy moderator. If there are no other nominations, Mr. Daniel has moved that Mr. Nixon be elected as deputy moderator. All those in favor, raise your card. Those opposed? Thank you. So voted unanimously. Article 1, to elect town officers, will be acted at the community center, the other side of the hill, on Thursday, June 25. Polls will be open from 12 o'clock noon until 6 o'clock p.m. Article 2, to hear the reports of town officers in committee, and I recognize the chair of the Finance Committee, Mr. Daniel.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. No extended remarks from the committee this year. We do encourage the taxpayers and citizens of Chatham to read our report included in the warrant. It contains quite a lot of information about the finances of the town, as well as our view of the state of important matters before town. Pursuant to a major theme in our report, we would like to give a shout out to the Board of Selectmen for their efforts in reducing the scope and cost of Article 18, the Eldridge Library repairs. The thoughtful revisioning and downscaling of this project at this uncertain time is emblematic of the approach we encourage them to take with respect to other large capital projects currently before town. We are proud to be Chatham's Finance Committee, and we shall not recuse ourselves from our responsibilities as members of such.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. As you know, and as I said earlier, a number of articles, petitioned articles, and also anything to do with the Council on Aging, it had been previously announced that those would be acted on at a September town meeting. And I recognize Ms. Davis for a motion to suspend the rules. Ms. Davis.
So moved.
Ms. Davis has moved that Articles 6, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, and 39 be indefinitely postponed and considered in September. If there is no further, Mr. Taylor.
Mr. Moderator, Seth Taylor on behalf of petitioners. One of the articles that is going to be recommended for indefinite postponement addresses the issue of a matter asking the Board of Selectmen to consider adopting the residential exemption for property taxes. My question through you to them is if they will agree to delay setting the tax rate until the meeting where that resolution can be voted.
Anyone care to respond to Mr. Taylor's question as to whether the tax rate could be not set until after September 19? Ms. Halala, our Finance Director.
Mr. Moderator, through you to the previous speaker. The tax rate could be delayed past September 19th. However, that would delay the issuing of the tax bills and may put the town in jeopardy for cash flow purposes. We may have to borrow short term. I would not know at this time what that impact would be, but that could be an impact, but yes, it could be delayed till after September 19th.
Thank you, Ms. Halala. Further discussion? I would observe as the moderator that because we had previously announced that this was going to occur, and because absentees may not have come this evening based on their assumption of that to be the case, I would suggest to you that it would be appropriate to indefinitely postpone, but it's up to the meeting. There is not anything further. All those in favor of indefinite postponement of those articles, raise your card. Thank you. And those opposed? Well over a two-thirds vote. I saw not more than half a dozen cards. So those articles on the list that I just read, 6, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, and 39 will be acted on in September. Now recognize the chair of the Board of Selectmen, Ms. Davis, for a motion in regard to a consent calendar.
The consent calendar, okay. I move that we vote to take the following articles out of order and that each be approved and adopted with sums raised and appropriated or transferred as case may be, as set forth in the respective articles in the warrant. Article 5, salaries of elected officers. Article 7, annual revolving funds. Article 12, Cape Cod Regional Tech High School assessment. Article 16, Child Care Voucher Program. Article 19, OPEB Trust Fund Appropriation. Article 29, CPA Administrative Expenses. Article 30, CPA Reserves. Article 31, CPA Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Article 32, CPA Housing Coordinator. Article 34, CPA Cape Housing Institute. Article 35, CPA Eldridge Public Library Roof Masonry and Windows. And Article 36, Water Capital Mains Transfer.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. I would save Mr. Daniel some time and report that the Finance Committee recommends all of these articles as printed in the warrant. Any questions on any of those articles before we vote on them? If not, all those in favor, raise your card. Thank you. And those opposed? So voted by a very, very substantial majority, not more than 1 or 2 noes. We will now proceed on with the regular business of town meeting, Article 3, to see if the town vote to raise appropriate transfer from available funds sum of money for prior year's bills. For motion, Ms. Davis.
I'm looking for the motion, hold on. So moved. Oh, I move that the town vote to appropriate and transfer from free cash the sum of $4,757.08 for payment of the following invoices.
It is indeed unusual to scale down, but once
Right.
in a while.
Sorry, guys.
Once in a while we have to. Finance Committee recommendation, Mr. Daniel.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Being the Finance Committee, we enthusiastically and unanimously support the town paying its bills.
Thank you. Further discussion under Article 3? If not, all those, this requires a 4/5 vote. All those in favor, raise your card, please. Thank you. And all those opposed? So voted by more than the requisite 4/5 majority. Mr. Costello, under our bylaw and under the statute, I have the right to declare a 2/3 majority. Do I have the right to declare a 4/5? I'm not sure that I do. Yeah, yes, Mr. Costello says I do. Thank you. That's encouraging. So we will declare that by not more than 2 negative votes, more than a 4/5 majority. Article 5 has been carried on the consent calendar. Article 6 has been indefinitely postponed. Article 7 has been carried on the consent calendar. Article 8, to see if the town will vote to raise an appropriate transfer from available funds a sum of money to operate the wood waste reclamation facility in Northwest Chatham. For a motion, Ms. Davis.
I move that the town vote to appropriate $25,000 to operate the Wood Waste Reclamation Facility Enterprise Fund, and to meet said appropriations, the town raised $25,000 through lease revenue and other funds available for appropriation.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Finance Committee recommendation, Mr. Daniel.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The Finance Committee supports the $25,000 appropriation to operate the wood waste reclamation facility, noting that the town receives approximately the same amount in revenue through its lease of the facility to the operator.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Further discussion? If not, all those in favor, raise your card. Those opposed? So voted unanimously. Article 9, the town's operating budget. For a motion, Ms. Davis.
I move that the town vote to appropriate the sum of $31,826,211 to fund the operating budget for the town for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2020, for the purposes and amounts designated in the column titled Proposed Budget FY 2021 of Article 9 of the warrant, and to meet the said appropriation. The town raised $257,011 through taxation, and transfer $130,000 from the Waterways Improvement Fund, $347,700 from the Land Bank Fund, $30,000 from the Wetlands Protection Fund, $50,000 from the PEG Capital Access Fund, $10,000 from the Cemetery Sales of Lots Fund, and $1,500 from the Railroad Museum Fund.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Finance Committee recommendation, Mr. Daniel.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The Finance Committee was supportive of the efforts of the Town Manager, the Board of Selectmen, and the Finance Director to develop a reforecasted budget in the wake of the emergence of the pandemic. We fully support the adoption of this revised budget.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. I'll now recognize our Town Manager, Ms. Goldsmith, if you would like, or if there are questions, I will entertain those. Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Not a question. Seth Taylor. I wish to submit a motion and an amendment to the article. I wish to amend the amount of the operating budget, which now reads $31,826,211, to the figure $30,826,211, and that the amount of money raised by taxes be reduced a similar amount, which is $1 million total dollars. And the basis for that, Mr. Moderator and my fellow voters and citizens, is that for the past 10 years or so, we have continuously run at least $1 million of free cash year over year. And that free cash is not free. It's money that we vote based on an operating budget that tells us it's needed, and then it turns into free cash, which isn't free. It becomes a slush money that gets distributed throughout other places, and we all feel like, well, how lucky we are. I think it's time to do away with that practice of padding a budget with an extra $1 million, and I think it's past time that we do that. And in this historic time of COVID-19, there's no better time than for us to accept some fiscal responsibility. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Mr. Taylor has moved that the overall appropriation be reduced by $1 million and that the amount raised by taxation be similarly reduced by $1 million. Further discussion of the article or the amendment? Not, we will, if there is nothing further, we'll vote on the amendment. We're now going to vote on Mr. Taylor's amendment that the appropriation for the town's operating budget for fiscal 2021 be reduced by $1 million. All those in favor of the amendment, raise your card. Thank you. And those opposed? My opinion, the noes have it. Unless there's a request for a count, the noes have it. Thank you. The article does not prevail. Further discussion under Article 9? If not, the main motion is as offered by Ms. Davis. The town vote to appropriate the sum of $31,826,211 and to meet the appropriation that sums be raised or appropriated or transferred as set forth in the motion. All those in favor, raise your card. Thank you. And those opposed? My opinion, the ayes have it. It only requires a majority vote, but a majority vote has been passed. Article 10, the Monomoy Regional School operating budget. For a motion, Ms. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the town vote to appropriate the sum of $9,019,089 to fund the operating budget for the Monomoy Regional School District for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2020, for the purposes and amounts designated in the column titled Proposed Budget Fiscal Year 2021 of Article 10 of the warrant, and to meet said appropriation, the town raise $9,019,089 through the tax rate.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Finance Committee recommendation, Mr. Daniel.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The Finance Committee voted unanimously to support the proposed Monomoy Regional School District budget. We note, as was the case with our operating budget, this budget was also subject to a reforecast following the emergence of the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Further discussion under the article? Not, we'll put the matter to a vote. All those in favor of the motion as offered by Ms. Davis, say aye.
Aye.
Whoop, bad habit, I'm sorry. Thank you. You all raised your cards. Thank you. And now those opposed. Thank you. I admit that the article passes. I admit that I've been doing this for a long time, and old habits are hard to break. Obviously, in the 3 decades plus, a lot of you have said Litchfield is out in left field, and in fact, finally tonight I am. So it works out well. There will be no motion under Article 11. Article 12 has been carried on the consent calendar. Article 13, the Water Department operating budget. For motion, Ms. Davis.
Thank you. I move that the town vote to appropriate $3,051,297 for direct costs, and further that an additional $290,320 be transferred to the general fund to be applied to overhead and indirect costs associated with the Water Department operating budget of the town for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2020, for the purposes and in the amounts designated in the column titled Proposed Water Budget Fiscal Year 2021 of Article 13 of the warrant, and to meet said appropriation, the town raise $2,941,617 through water receipts and raise $400,000 through the tax rate for a total of $3,341,617.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Finance Committee recommendation, Mr. Daniel.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Given our belief that abundant, high-quality water is one of the golden eggs upon which our town goose sits, we wholly support this article.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Further discussion under Article 13. Not all those in favor, raise your card. Thank you. And those opposed? Thank you. So voted unanimously. Article 14, the town, to see if the town vote to raise and appropriate transfer from available funds a sum of money for certain capital projects for the coming year. For a motion, Ms. Davis.
I move that the town vote to appropriate $2,324,145 for the purpose of funding the fiscal year 2021 capital budget in the column titled Fiscal Year 2021 Proposed of Article 14 of the warrant, and to meet said appropriation, the town transfer $2,074,145 from free cash and $150,000 from the Waterway Improvements Fund and $100,000 from the PEG Cable Access Fund.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Finance Committee recommendation, Mr. Daniel.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The Finance Committee supports Article 14 relating to these smaller capital spending projects. As is typically the case, this article is supported not by the tax rate, but by the aforementioned funds that the Chair of the Board of Selectmen mentioned.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Further discussion under Article 14. If not, all those in favor, raise your card. Thank you. And now those opposed? So voted unanimously. Article 15, to see if the town vote to transfer from Educational Cable Access Fund sum of $119,000 for the purposes set forth herein. For a motion, Ms. Davis.
Thank you. I move that the town vote to transfer the sum of $119,307.50 from the Educational Cable Access Fund for the purpose of funding the upgrade and management of equipment at the TV studio located at the Monomoy Regional High School.
Thank you. Finance Committee recommendation, Mr. Daniel.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. This article is essentially a maneuver to move funds from one account on the town's books, that being receipts reserved for appropriation, to another, so that these funds can then be used to upgrade equipment at the Monomoy Regional High School TV station. At the time of Harwich's town meeting, which I think is in September of this year, they will be taking similar action to equally fund its share of the upgrade costs. We support this article.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Further discussion? Not. All those in favor, raise your card. Those opposed, raise your card. Don't know who Peg is, but she had a good night. Article 16, do you see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate this? Well, I'm sorry, that was passed on the consent calendar. Article 17, capital dredging. For a motion, Ms. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the town appropriate the sum of $500,000 for the purpose of paying costs related to dredging within Chatham waterways, including costs for engineering, permitting, and construction, including all costs incidental and related thereto, and to meet this appropriation, transfer $500,000 from free cash.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Finance Committee recommendation, Mr. Daniel.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Now, notwithstanding the fact that the town has spent close to $1 million over the past year on dredging, we note the importance of maintaining safe access to our harbors and waterways. We note as well the economic importance of that access for our commercial and recreational fleets. The Finance Committee supports this article.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Further discussion under Article 17? There is none. All those in favor, raise your card. Thank you. And those opposed? So voted unanimously. Article 18, see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate transfer from available funds a sum of money for Eldridge Public Library exterior repairs. For a motion, Ms. Davis.
Thank you. To see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate and/or transfer from available funds the sum of $701,800 for construction bidding documents, project oversights, and implementation of shell repairs, improvements to the Eldridge Public Library located at 564 Main Street, and for all costs incidental and related thereto, to take any action in relation thereto.
I'm sorry, I should have stopped you earlier.
Oh, yeah, I didn't read it. I'm
You
sorry.
read the article rather than the
Yeah,
motion.
I did, didn't I? I'm so sorry. I move that the town appropriate the sum of $701,800 for construction bidding documents, project oversight, and implementation of building exterior shell repairs, improvements to the Eldridge Public Library, and for the costs incidental and related thereto, and to meet this appropriation, transfer $443,600 from the appropriation authorized under Article 15 of the May 14, 2018 annual town meeting, and raise $258,200 through the tax rate, provided, however, that said amount raised through the tax rate may be offset and reduced by the amount of funding authorized for the subject project under Article 36 pursuant to the Community Preservation Act.
I think that is Article 35, technically. There was a slight glitch, we'll call it a typo, but I think what you actually said was in the last line, the subject property under Article 35 pursuant to the Community Preservation Act, even though it is printed otherwise in the warrant.
Correct.
Thank you. Finance Committee recommendation, Mr. Daniel.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. In the wake of the pandemic, Article 18 has been revised to both lower the proposed scope and cost of repairs. This alone is something we vigorously applaud. The article has been further revised to change elements of the funding for those repairs. Town meeting may recall that in 2018, it approved funding for the library site and certain building improvements. A good portion of that funding will now be directed to paying for these repairs rather than for the site improvements. Additionally, if approved, Article 35 will provide incremental funding for this project. The Finance Committee supports Article 18.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Further discussion under Article 18? There is none. All those in favor, raise your card. Thank you. And those opposed? So voted unanimously. Article 19 was carried on the consent calendar. Article 20, capital project, the transfer station redesign on Samuraizer Road. For a motion, Ms. Davis.
Thank you. I move that $470,000 be appropriated for the purpose of paying costs of redesign, renovation, construction, and equipping the town transfer station located at 97 Samuraizer Road, and for the payment of all other costs incidental and related thereto, and that to meet this appropriation, the treasurer, with the approval of the Board of Selectmen, is hereby authorized to borrow said amount under and pursuant to Chapter 44, Section 7, Number 1, or pursuant to any other enabling authority, and to issue bonds or notes of the town thereto, therefore, provided, however, that borrowing authorized hereunder is contingent upon passage of so-called debt exclusion referendum vote pursuant to Chapter 59, Section 21C of the General Laws, Proposition 2.5, and further that the Board of Selectmen is authorized to apply for and accept any grants or contributions that may be available toward the cost of said project from the federal government, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and otherwise. Any premium received by the town upon the sale of any bonds or notes approved by this vote, less any such premium applied to the payment of the costs of issuance of such bonds or notes be applied to the payment costs approved by this vote in accordance with Chapter 44, Section 20 of the General Laws, thereby reducing the amount authorized to be borrowed to pay such cost by a like amount.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Finance Committee recommendation, Mr. Daniel.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. This project will provide funding to make certain accessibility and workplace safety improvements that are mandated by the federal government. The Finance Committee is in support of this article.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Further discussion under Article 20. This requires a two-thirds vote. If there is no further discussion, all those in favor raise your card. Thank you. And those opposed? So voted by more than the requisite majority, well over the two-thirds, and I so declare. Articles 21 through 28 have been indefinitely postponed. Articles 29, 30, 31, and 32 were acted on the consent calendar. You can skip over to page 53, and on page 53 we'll find Article 33, the Rental Assistance Program proposal. For a motion, Ms. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the town vote to appropriate and transfer from the Community Preservation estimated revenues in accordance with the provision of Mass General Law, Chapter 40B, Section 5, the sum of $150,000 in order to fund the rental assistant program, including necessary costs and expenses related thereto, as recommended by the Community Preservation Committee.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Finance Committee recommendation, Mr. Daniel.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Chatham's Rental Assistance Program assists families who work or live in Chatham in retaining their homes, in Chatham. Most of the families engaged in this program have children in the Monomoy School District, which we view as a real benefit to our town. The Finance Committee supports this article.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Further discussion under Article 33. If there is none, all those in favor raise your card. Thank you. And those opposed? So voted unanimously. And ladies and gentlemen, if I say unanimously and I miss someone, I apologize. Stand up and tell me if you care that much, but I think where I'm seeing unanimous, it is that. Article 34 was carried on the consent calendar, as were Articles 35 and 36, which moved us to Article 37, a water capital item in regard to a generator. For a motion, Ms. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the town appropriate $150,000 for a generator at well number 3 and for all costs incidental and related thereto, and to meet this appropriation, transfer from available funds of the Water Department, water revenue and user fees, the sum of $150,000.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Finance Committee recommendation, Mr. Daniel.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. This sensible capital improvement will add redundancy and durability to a portion of the town's water supply. We note that funding for this article does not come through the tax rate, but through water rates. Nevertheless, whether coming from the right pocket or the left pocket, it's all coming from the same pair of pants. That said, we're wholly in support of this article.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Further discussion under Article 37? Not. All those in favor raise your card. Those opposed, raise your card. So voted unanimously. It's simply observed for the meeting's edification, the reasons that Articles 37 and 38 were not included on the consent calendar was nothing to do with the substance. It was merely because the article, when written, didn't specify a funding source. And to go on the consent calendar, everything has to be there, and on 37 and 38, it's not a fault of anyone, that's the only reason they weren't. Article 38, to see if the town vote to appropriate $385,000 for interior improvements for the building at well number 3. For a motion, Ms. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the town appropriate $385,000 for interior improvements to well number 3 building and for all costs incidental and related thereto. That to meet this appropriation, transfer from available funds of the Water Department, water revenues and user fees, the sum of $385,000.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Finance Committee recommendation, Mr. Daniel.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. As with the other water-related articles, the Finance Committee is in support of Article 38.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Further discussion? If not, all those in favor, raise your card. Thank you. And those opposed? Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, you have done something that is truly extraordinary. We have been having town meetings since 1712. I was not actually at the first few. But we, insofar as anyone knows, have never met outside. We have never met in a set of circumstances quite like these, and you are to be commended for your public spiritedness, your dedication to the town of Chatham, and to your community spirit. I want to again thank all the town employees who worked so very hard to make this possible this evening. And I don't want Mr. Dykens to feel left out. Mr. Dykens, come up and grab Ms. Davis's microphone and move that we adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Motion to adjourn, please.
Mr. Dykens has moved that we adjourn. All those in favor, go ahead, say it. Aye. Thank you. We stand adjourned. Thank you all very much.